Good evening, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Jason Boone. I'm with Dorn Whittier Architects. Many of you are familiar faces. Some of you, I think, are brand new to visioning, although we probably met you in user groups and in other types of meetings. I'll introduce the rest of our crew in just a minute, but by a show of hands, how many people this is their first visioning session of the process? Okay, so there are a few of you. Good. The reason I ask that is we're going to go over the process just one more time. So for those of you who have heard that already, I apologize, but it's important that we all understand what the process is. So I'm with Dorn Whittier. With us tonight, we have a whole crew of Dorn Whittier folks. I'll invite them to introduce themselves at your individual tables, but they're going to help us facilitate. And if folks are uncomfortable drawing, they're here to be the listeners and the pen. So you'll see lots more Dorn Whittier folks around the room tonight. Our basic agenda is to once again review what the MSBA process is and where we are in it. We have some new information to share tonight. We're going to summarize the outcomes of Visioning Session 1 and Visioning Session 2. We've also now completed our facility assessment and our space analysis. So we're going to share some of that information with you for the first time tonight. And then we're going to move very quickly into the major exercise of the evening, where we're all going to work on some conceptual design activities, and I'll give some more instructions about that in just a minute. We'll end, this is our third of 3 visioning sessions in this first part of the process. We'll end this evening with some key takeaways, just like we have in the previous 2 evenings. The MSBA, as our partner, that's the Massachusetts School Building Authority, will be helping, hopefully, if we're all successful, help fund part of the project, and because they're providing some of the funding, we have to follow their process. It's an 8-step process that you began in the spring of 2015. Here we are in the fall of 2017. We're right at the beginning of the feasibility study. As we move through the process, there's a couple of major submissions at the end of the feasibility study process. Then we start drawing the project for real, and we end up with a project funding agreement at the end of schematic design. So town votes will occur in the fall of 2018. If everything goes according to plan, whatever the project is, new construction or renovation addition, we can occupy that project in the fall of 2021 or fall of 2022, depending on the complexity of the sequence. The work we're doing tonight falls in Module 3, that feasibility study that I just mentioned, where we're trying to accomplish the first couple of these bullets. We've been working with the district to define how teaching and learning happens here in the district. Your work tonight is going to inform the space program, not to the moon, but what kind of spaces are necessary to go in the project. We're going to use that to develop a wide range of options. We'll get those costs estimated. We'll go through an evaluation process. And ultimately, as I mentioned at the end of feasibility study, we're going to pick the one preferred option. Then we'll draw that in schematic design. And at the end of schematic design, we will set the project budget. Everybody will know exactly how much it's going to cost. That options evaluation process that I mentioned, again, the MSBA has guidelines for this. There are 2 enrollments that we're exploring as part of the Kentucky Regional School District Agreement with the MSBA. A high school only project that would serve just grades 9 through 12 for an enrollment of 605 students. Similarly, there's an agreement to explore a 7 through 12 scenario for an enrollment of 965 students. As you'll see in just a few minutes, both of those numbers are lower than the enrollments you have today. We'll talk about what the consequences and realities of that are in just a couple of minutes. The MSBA will require that in this first stage, during the exploration of the many, we have to explore at least renovation only, renovation addition, and new construction for both scenarios. So as we move through this preliminary design program, that's the first step in the feasibility study, we will go from the many to the few. So some of those options will fall out. We're likely to have 3 or 4 options instead of 6 to 10 options. In the next step of the feasibility study, what's called the preferred schematic report, we'll take those few options and refine them. We'll explore them in more detail. We'll draw them in more detail. And then ultimately, we'll have an evaluation process around those shortlisted options. And at the conclusion of the feasibility study, we're going to pick the one. And there's a whole process associated with just the evaluations to pick both the few and the one. Questions about the MSBA process? This is where my teacher wait time kicks in. Okay. We've had 2 visioning sessions already, both of them in November. If you remember, in visioning session number 1, we were sort of exploring the big picture, the sort of 30,000-foot view of education, what's happened in education since these 2 buildings were constructed, how the world has changed since these 2 buildings were constructed, and how that might affect the project. We also conducted an exercise where we asked folks, what's important to you? What are your goals and objectives for the project? And that's what you're seeing on the screen here. Obviously, there was a much longer list. We tried to distill that down into the most common items. Process was really important, which is why you're here tonight, and why we'll continue to engage all stakeholders in the process all along the way. Everyone wants it to be inclusive. Obviously, it has to pass, right? We have to do the steps necessary to be successful in all 3 communities. From an educational point of view, it was clear that people wanted the project to be extremely flexible. Future-proof is a term that we've heard. The last thing anyone wants to do is construct a building that's exactly like what we have today, or that after a few years of being open, it's obsolete. So how do we do that? We have to figure that out. And student-centered, that if there are decisions to be made where adult interests and student interests aren't compatible, to err on the side of student preference, right? To make spaces that are student-friendly. Obviously, it has to be cost-effective. We're looking for not necessarily the cheapest solution, but a cost-effective solution that has a high value to cost ratio. And then finally, that we turn over every stone, right? That we explore the widest range of options possible to make sure we didn't miss something. We also did, and I wish, I wonder exercise around some current examples. And so I won't read these, but this is a sampling of some of the common themes we heard from that particular exercise. Some repeated things from the goals and objectives exercise. I will respond to the 3 things on the bottom, the I wonder items. We had people ask if interior glass was distracting. And what's interesting about that is that post-occupancy evaluations have shown that students acclimate to interior glass much faster than the adults do. And that once it becomes part of the culture, it turns out to not be distracting to students. We had some meetings just this week where we talked about the small vision panels that you have at Pentucket High School and how kids go up and they put their face right on the glass to see their friends through that tiny little window. And part of that phenomenon is associated with that's the only view of teaching and learning that there is. So once everything is reasonably on display, then you don't have to put your face right up against the glass to see what's going on. And like I said, the kids acclimate to that much faster than the adults do. Some of the examples we explored had scenarios where teachers didn't own their own classroom. Their home base was in a teacher planning suite. So one of the questions we got was, I wonder how teachers would feel about not owning their own space. We'll talk some more about that tonight. But we've started having those conversations with the faculty and staff, and it's, as expected, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. Some people would welcome the opportunity to collaborate with others in a teacher-only setting and then have the flexibility to pick and choose rooms based on the activity. Others were, more interested in a model where they owned their own space, they could put up their own decorations, it was theirs. And so we have to figure out how to balance, those competing interests. And then finally, this last, I wonder, was about the range of student needs. Obviously, 21st century schools look very different than 20th century schools in many ways. And this question was about, is that appropriate for everyone? And the way we've been responding to that is by mentioning that one of the key features of the 21st century school is variety. And so if we are able to create a model that's not, the one-size-fits-all classroom and it has these specific features, but instead have a much wider range of instructional spaces, then it will be appropriate for every student because there'll be an opportunity in a space that they're selecting to be in. In visioning session number 2, we probed 2 big topics. We probed the grade configuration topic, and we probed the building organization topic. For the grade configuration topic, we asked folks to respond to the advantages and disadvantages of the 2 enrollment models that we're exploring. And overwhelmingly, at least those in attendance preferred the 7 through 12 model. A lot of that had to do with, if the MSBA is going to start with a 50% or so reimbursement rate, then perhaps we can get 2 projects for the price of 1. A lot of it also revolved around, well, if we only do the high school, 10 years from now, we're going to have to come back and do the middle school, and what's the added cost associated with time? And so with those things in mind, they said, yeah, we'd be really interested in the 7 through 12 model as long as we could be assured that there can be a high level of separation between the middle school portion and the high school portion. And we're going to explore some of that more tonight as well. In terms of building organization, the key term that I think we pulled out was future-proof. Right? You can organize a building by department, you can organize a building by interdisciplinary, you can organize a building by Innovation Academy, and I think the groups responded that, yes, please. Not just one of those, but can we set up a building that can do all of those? And how do we do that? Well, one of the ways we do that is by placing infrastructure-intensive things like science, or like engineering, or like art, in a way that they can serve something other than a strict departmental model. And your tabletops will talk about that more in a little bit. We already talked about the separation. And then finally, this idea of zoning the building into public and private areas. Perhaps there's core elements that are going to be accessible to the public. We have a table about community use this evening. And if we can do that in a way that we can actually log off the academic portion of the building after hours and on the weekends to keep them separate, that would be perceived as a positive thing. We also, around building organization, did this activity. How many of you were here for that? Okay. This is just 3 samples. I think there were 14 boards altogether. And in fact, we got the question at the end of the evening, what in the world are you going to do with this? How do you make sense of all of this, seemingly chaos? And so we put these 3 samples on the board to demonstrate what we did with that. So even though these are very different, there's some common themes in each of them. So just to orient you, blue is classrooms, orange is health and PE stuff, green is student dining, and yellow is media center. So in all 3 of these, those sort of public functions are in the middle of clusters of classrooms and essentially split into middle school and high school. So that's one of the common themes that we pulled out of that particular exercise. Right, this idea of a shared core. Perhaps there are some program elements that want to be accessible to the public. And then the second thing that we pulled out of that was this idea of a non-traditional student dining experience, more collegiate, perhaps as a dining commons that connects the middle school and high school, instead of being like the room we're in, it's a destination off a corridor somewhere. This only gets used, for study hall or for lunch 2 periods a day. It's not aesthetically pleasing as a social space or as a research space or as a making space, but perhaps a dining commons concept could be. In addition to the visioning studies, visioning sessions, we've also done some existing conditions analysis. I won't go through all these words. We have them on the screen so that when we post this to the website, people can review this in a little more detail. The basic message is that both buildings are tired. Many of the systems are outdated, have exceeded their useful life. There are a few places where boilers have been replaced. Windows were replaced in the 90s at the high school, but they're failing. There's no sprinklers at the high school. We would never do that today if we were building a building from scratch. So all of those things are evidence why a project is needed. Right? Both buildings are antiquated both physically and, as we'll see in just a minute, spatially compared to contemporary standards. Similar message at the middle school. It's not in quite as bad shape, but it's very close. Many of the systems are very close to the end of their useful life. And so here's a Consumer Reports summary of that facility assessment information. The darker the circle, the poorer the condition of the system. And so if you look across the top row here, site circulation is fair, the roof is poor, walls, windows, and doors, fair. The thermal envelope, the exterior wall, there's no insulation in that, the windows are in bad shape. Oops, excuse me. Fair. The mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire protection systems are poor, finishes are fair, accessibility is fair, health and safety, all fair. So there's not a good circle among the bunch. The middle school is a little better. We have, the roof is reasonably good, the exterior wall, doors and windows is reasonably good, and interior finishes are reasonably good, but everything else is in fair condition. Again, there's no very goods and no excellence here. So again, we're putting this out there as part of the evidence that something needs to be done with the two facilities. And then finally, I mentioned we did some spatial analysis. With the MSBA as our partner, any new or renovated spaces are going to have to reasonably fall within their guidelines. And so what we did was we took the existing buildings and we compared the existing space use to those guidelines. Red is undersized compared to the guideline by 10% or more. Yellow is within 10% of the guideline, and green is oversized by 10% or more. And so just to orient you, this is the lower level of the high school. There's the gymnasium, the little gym, classroom wing, and it's a little bit of a mixed bag. Some of the big takeaways we had were that the classrooms are either right-sized or undersized, and more of them are undersized on this level than right-sized. The main gym, as I'm sure some of you are experiencing, is also well below the MSBA guidelines for that space. These numbers are repeated on the next slide, so I'll come back to that in just a minute. On the main level, here's the front door that faces the loop. Here's the back door to the parking lot, cafeteria, auditorium. And a similar message here. Right? Many of the classrooms are either right-sized or undersized. Only the cafeteria and a handful of spaces are oversized. The media center is also undersized. And so, in performing this analysis, we came to an interesting realization. In the request for services for this project, the building was reported to be 209,000 square feet. Based on our analysis, it's not quite that big. Right? In fact, it's significantly smaller. And a little bit of backstory to that is a report was done not quite 10 years ago that relied on a district number that no one verified. And so when we used the construction drawings and actually put some tape measures on the ground, we believe the existing building to actually be around 147,000 square feet, not 209,000 square feet. So that's an important thing for everybody to realize. The building is already much smaller than perhaps many of us thought it was. So when we think about that for the existing population, right, 9 through 12 is 739 kids. If we were to build this building from scratch for just that population today, the MSBA would suggest that it's around 156,000 square feet. So this also explains part of the spatial pinch that people are feeling. Not only are the individual rooms small, but the high school in general overall is small for its current population. relative to those guidelines. At the middle school, we have a fairly similar message. Here's the front door, district offices. We're in the cafeteria. Many of the classrooms are either right-sized or undersized. Cafeteria is big. Gymnasium is right-sized. In a middle school with the MSBA, you don't typically get an auditorium. So there is no guideline for that tiny space. When we measured this building, we also came to a similar conclusion. It was reported as 110,000 square feet. We actually think this building is a little bit bigger than that when you include the auditorium and the district offices. For its population, right, it's the opposite story. If we were to build it for the 462 kids today, we would only get approximately 87,000 square feet. And you can imagine why that is. We wouldn't have an auditorium. We wouldn't have district offices, and all of the spaces would be right-sized instead of a few of them being oversized. So that's all data that's leading us to where we're going to go next, which is generating a proposed space summary, a listing of all the spaces that need to be in the project, and the development of options. So you remember that those enrollments we were talking about today are significantly higher than the agreed upon enrollments for the proposed project. So if we were to add the existing buildings together today, we're looking at around 253,000 square feet. If we were to use the two independent schools and stitch them together approach, the MSBA would say, all right, well, you're going to need around 215,000 square feet. If we were to use the put them all in one bucket approach, which is another possibility, it would be slightly smaller than that, right? Economies of scale. And so while we don't know yet how big this project is, tonight we wanted to alert people that the resulting project is probably going to fall somewhere in between those two numbers, in the 210,000 square foot range. We won't know for sure until we synthesize the outcome of tonight's meeting and some user groups that we've been having over the last couple of weeks. Questions about that data, visioning and the analysis?
But I don't know why, or I'm sorry, I don't understand why we're using such a smaller number for the projected students.
Did everybody get a question? The MSBA and the district negotiate these agreed upon enrollments based on the enrollment trajectory that is occurring. And so the data that the MSBA originally had, the numbers were actually even lower. And so the district was able to make an argument for slightly higher numbers, and this is the outcome of that discussion. We have heard concerns about the building being too small on opening day. That's part of our design challenge. This enrollment is a reality that we have to deal with, but we'll work hard to build as much capacity within the constraints of the project as we can. Yes?
Does the MSBA allow for allocation for district office space separately from enrollment at additional square footage?
It does not. So you could include district offices in the project, but the MSBA does not reimburse for that square footage.
Do they take into consideration, for instance, I'm familiar with North Reading High School. So North Reading High School built a new school, in fact, I think we designed it. Okay, nice job. So that was done, and then their enrollment spiked. So Pentucket was the second largest school in the Cape Ann League, and now, I'm just thinking, what considerations are taken into that? Because when I talk to members at North Reading High School, it's one of those, if you build it, they will come.
Well, they want to leave.
So for good or bad, this is the process, right? They have some data, you had some data, everybody agrees to a number, and that's what the project has to live with. The MSBA's position on enrollment spikes would be, well, if that happens, your designer should have positioned the project in such a way that an addition could be placed in the future. And if it really becomes a crisis, come back to us and perhaps we'll help you build that addition. You can imagine this from their point of view, right? They have to draw a line in the sand somewhere, and we just have to play by those rules. Because they've actually had to go the other way, where they've agreed to a number and the kids never showed up, right? And that, both circumstances are bad. So this is what we have to live with, and we'll work to build capacity to the extent that we can. But they don't necessarily take into account that if you build it, it will come back. Other questions? Okay, fantastic. So we're going to jump right in. We're going to take a couple of hours to do this conceptual design exercise. And this is what we hope the outcome will be for each table. An illustration that communicates your vision for the spaces associated with each one of these topics. We have no idea what the right answer is. That's why we're asking you. I think most of you have figured out already that there are 12 topics, and we had the definitions of those back here at the table. I won't go through them. Is there any questions about the nature of any one of the topics? Do I need to describe what we're talking about when we say we have a table associated with stress reduction? Terrific. Is everybody where they want to be? Let's just check. We got 2 people in media, 3 folks here. That's a full table. 3 folks there. You're a little light in the core academic categories. Yep, so let's combine. Oh, you're okay. Then you, okay. If you're not at the table you want to be sitting at, please move now. So perhaps what we should do is combine STEM and core academics so that we have a slightly. You guys have 3, Margaret? Okay, then you guys can stay. Here's what we want you to do. We understand that not all of you are educators or staff members. And that's exactly what we want, right? We want everyone to bring their own personal experiences to the discussion. Whether you have a professional expertise in your topic out in the real world, or you have a child with that particular interest, we intentionally want to have as wide-range conversation each one of these topics as possible. There are 4 key things that we need to walk away with. And there are detailed instructions on your table that you guys can read, and I would invite you to ask questions of your facilitators. But the 4 things we have to walk away with is enough information to know what type of spaces are necessary, how many of them do you think there need to be, how big they are, I'll talk more about that in just a second, and where they are in relation to other things. Not only other things in your topic, but other things in the building. So how big? We don't want you to get caught up in square footages. Right, that's going to be our job back at the lab. In order to determine how big, the things we need to know are what kinds of activities are taking place. How many people are occupying the space at any one given time? What specialty equipment, if any, need to be in that room? Right, we don't want to design the inside of the room. We just want to know enough about it to give it a reasonably right size. Everybody understand that? Okay. You have some tools at your table, and I see that many of you have already gotten into the goodie bags. Let me just quickly go through what those tools are. Josh Hagan, you got tools in your hand at one of them. So your designer's got an array of drawing tools. There should be a stack of images meant to communicate what you think a space might feel like or look like or function like. You have a set of what we call programming bubbles. Can you guys hold up one of those? A quick note about those. Those are to scale. They're 1/16 of an inch equals a foot. But we didn't give you by intention the full complement of what you might actually need. Right? We only provided those as tools for what types of spaces might you want to talk about. So for example, core academic and STEM folks. We know there's not the right number of science rooms in that piece of paper. Okay? Don't get caught up on the count that we provided you. You tell us what you think is necessary. Right? Just tools. What other tools do we have at the table? Some of you have floor plans, right? Examples of what has been designed in the past. That hints at furniture and shape. But we don't want you to be constrained. Right? This is visioning. These are concept boards. We only wanted to provide you with enough resources to get the conversation started. As you're talking, we want you to be careful not just to think about your topic, but think about some other things. Right? We talked about future-proof. Make sure you're trying to think into the future. That guiding principle of flexibility. How can this space be used by someone else? How can it be changed in the future? Do we need more than one variety of a certain space? Right? We shared last time an example where not all the classrooms were the same. Some were big, some were little, some had sliding doors, some didn't. It's highly unlikely that every idea that gets generated in the room tonight we're going to be able to afford. So if there are priorities to be made, make sure we know what those are. If we can't live without this space, make sure we know what that is. Collaboration of all kinds has been another theme. Right? How can the topic that we're discussing enable collaboration, student to student, student to teacher, teacher to teacher? How does your discussion impact the idea of 7 and 8 being combined with 9 through 12? Does it mean that there are duplicates? Does it mean that they're sharing? What are the consequences of a potential middle high school? And then finally, the relationship with the outside. In our user group meetings, we've already heard that we have this wonderful campus with a river, with a detention pond, with wetlands, with woodlands. How can we take advantage of the outside as part of the learning experience? And so, like I mentioned, we're going to have a couple of hours to do this. We're going to give you 45 minutes to make your first iteration. This is going to be just like design school. So you're going to create a concept board, and then we're going to pause. We're actually going to use these tables on the wall as pinup space. You're going to hang your concept on the wall. And then we're going to take the post-it notes at your table, and we're going to do critiques of them. We're going to provide feedback. You're going to take that feedback back to your table, and perhaps there are some adjustments that you want to make, something you didn't consider previously. And then we'll give everybody an opportunity to get up and look at everybody's final work to conclude the exercise. I don't know how many of you have been to design school or know what a critique is like. We're going to use this technique, the plus delta technique. So on your post-it notes at critique time, we're going to have you write a big plus and make a comment when you really like something about someone else's work. A delta is something that you would like to have them consider changing. But it's important that we're not providing negative feedback. Right? That's not really all that useful to anyone. So we would invite you to form this kind of feedback as a question. Did you consider whatever these factors are? Or is there an opportunity to do it in a different way? Or could it work better if we moved whatever it is? Right? Questions about that? So if you have any other questions, ask your team facilitators and we'll turn you loose. So in 45 minutes, we're going to pin up.
Rod, would you go down here? Down here.
Oh, you'll get down there. Just starting.
Let's move back to your tables. There's been some really fantastic work generated this evening. I think I can express this for our entire team. The work that you created will be incredibly informative as we take the next steps towards developing that space summary and creating options. While we don't want each table to report out, we would be interested in what you think perhaps some of the key takeaways are from this evening, if any. Did anybody have any aha moments? Or was there a particularly interesting concept that was developed that perhaps nobody had thought of before we gathered this evening? Does anyone want to share?
We'd really like to just go home, please. We've been here for 3 hours.
Nothing? Yes, Sarah.
So I think I realized that even just looking at our section, there are so many little bubbles just in our section that it's like one giant puzzle. And we had records and we had all these things that hadn't even like occurred to us that are all part of this puzzle. And thinking about, okay, what room has windows and what room do we not care about having windows? So it's just like all so much bigger. Thinking about it. So that was my aha.
It's an incredibly complex puzzle. Welcome to design school. What other insights are worth sharing?
So at sustainability, we talked about a lot of other great things, but for me, what was interesting were two things. One, talking about how the building can support education directly and indirectly through sustainable design, and then also how it can support the community. As well, at Twofer, we talked about planting in gardens, and then we said, well, maybe we could have sort of community gardens that could be both educational and a connection to the community.
Anyone else? Oh, yes.
So we were the stress reduction section, which was newly added last time. So thank you to Emily who helped guide us. We definitely talked about the philosophy of it, that it would really touch all of the pieces here. That it would be about aesthetics and lighting and student work and soft seating. If you didn't get a chance to look, we did two examples. One is a staff break room, collaboration center, and lounge area that would mimic the larger dining commons. And it would be similar setups with access to the outdoors, quiet features, soft seating, areas to be productive and work, but also areas to have some separation time and just chill too. So that was, we just wanted to mention that we kind of talked about all of your areas, and yet ours was more the philosophy that would permeate all of your areas.
And
want to add my aha moment while listening to that conversation, and we were talking about moments throughout the school for people to take breaks, but these were going to become moments where people, I think you said, colonization of ideas. So it was just kind of like impromptu collaboration, just ways for people to bump into each other and create something new.
How about the activity itself? Forget about the outcomes for a minute. We do this in a lot of different places, and it's always a little different each time. Any comments or feedback that you have about the activity itself? This is a tough crowd.
I liked it.
More time if we good on the initial part.
More time on the initial part.
And less on the other.
Okay, that's good feedback. Anything else?
Having the cutouts for spatial awareness is beneficial.
Okay, good.
I think, well, ours is the messiest, because we had time management issues, considering we had so many concerns or things that we wanted to make sure we included, and then we were like, okay, we're about to take it up. We were like, oh my God, and just trying to get it. So when we came back and revised it, we talked a lot about having access to the outside was important to us in a lot of our different content areas in the music and art conservatory. But I think it was a really good thing to have all those little pieces together too.
Any other final comments?
I think when visiting the other boards, it's helpful to have one person from the team there that could explain the thinking, just moving forward with the group, because it is hard to conceptually understand what another group was thinking, and if no one's there, you're making your own assumptions.
Okay, good. Anything else? Oh, yes, Aaron.
This was a great opportunity to just keep asking, well, what if? And to imagine what the possibilities might be, and to listen to other people's suggestions.
Well, now we have the hard work to take all of this information back to the office and synthesize it into a series of options that we're going to present after the new year. So in terms of next steps, we're working on finalizing dates for a public meeting in mid-January, where we're going to describe to the public what's been going on in these visioning sessions and the analysis that we shared with you this evening. And then we're going to have a follow-up public meeting in the middle of February where we're actually presenting the full range of conceptual options for the first time to the general public. So we would encourage you to keep your eyes and ears open for those finalized dates that will be coming shortly. Brad, did you have anything you wanted to add?
So I'd like to just thank everybody for coming as well. And this is our third visioning session, right? And so one of the things here that we have to remember, this is good, it's all about the planning, but we have a long road, right, that we still have to go down in order to take some of the stuff that we talked about, you know, some of the ideas that we were sharing tonight, and try and transform those into reality. And so we have probably about 50 plus or minus people here tonight. But sometime in November or sometime later this fall or whenever it is, we're going to have to go out to the 3 towns. And so we've got, you know, less than a year ultimately that we're going to be taking all of this, synthesizing it, distilling it down to where we can come up with what we think the vision that started here as part of these visioning sessions over the last month or so, and what that really means. But the important part is for us as a group to be able to start to communicate, because there's 50 here, and we're going to need 10 times that ultimately to make this a success. And so you folks are going to be the mouthpieces starting, right, to kind of go and get, if you've been to some of these other visioning sessions, heard me talk about momentum, and it's real, I can't tell you how important that is. And so when you're out there, you know, talking with your neighbors, talking with your friends, you're part of the cheerleading team that's going to help ultimately make this a success. And, you know, I really can't underscore that enough, because it is an exciting opportunity for everybody in all 3 towns, for the students, for the educators. So I guess what I'm saying is don't think that this is the last time for everybody to check in. Take advantage of these public meetings that are going to be there. The more people that we can go to understand what it is we're talking about, the greater likelihood we actually have to have some of these things come to reality. So again, thank you very much for coming. Hopefully we'll see you at the public meetings starting in January. And if you have any questions, I would encourage you to either, get those over to Jonathan or to Dr. Mulqueen, and, we'll do our best to either address those or try and incorporate those as we start to move forward. Thank you.